Then the pilgrims were very merry and sat at the table a long time, talking about many things. Then the old gentleman, Mr. Honest, said, "My good innkeeper, while we crack these nuts, will you please explain this riddle? A man there was, though some did count him mad. The more he cast away, the more he had." Then they all paid close attention, waiting to see what good words Gaius would have to say. For a moment he sat still. Then he said, "He who gives his goods to the poor shall have it returned to him, and 10 times more." Joseph's eyes grew wide. "I have to say, sir, I did not think you could have figured it out." "Oh," Gaius said, "I have been trained up in this way a great while. Nothing teaches like experience. Through experience I have gained an understanding of the kindness of the Lord. There are those who scatter and yet increase, and there are those who withhold more than they should, but it leads to poverty. There are those who make themselves rich, yet have nothing, and those who make themselves poor, yet hath great riches. There is one who scatters, and yet increases all the more, and there is one who withholds what is justly due, and yet it results only in want. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 24. Then Samuel whispered to Christiana, his mother, and said, "Mother, this is a very good man. Let us stay here in his house for a good while, and let my brother Matthew be married here to Mercy before we go any further." Gaius overheard Samuel's suggestion and said, "That's a very good idea, my child." As a result, they stayed there more than a month, and Mercy was given to Matthew as his wife. And while they stayed there, Mercy made coats and garments to give to the poor, which gave the Pilgrims a very good reputation. But let's get back to our story. After supper, the boys were ready to go to bed, for they were weary from traveling. Gaius called someone to show them to their bed chamber, but Mercy said, "I will tuck them in." She took them to their bed chamber, tucked them in, and they slept well. But the rest of the group sat up all night, for Gaius and the others enjoyed each other's company so much they didn't want to say good night. After they talked much about their Lord, themselves, and their journey, old Mr. Honest began to nod off. Great Heart said, "What? Are you getting drowsy? Come on, here's a riddle for you to think about." "Let us hear it," Mr. Honest said. Great Heart said, "He who would kill must first be overcome. He who would live abroad first must die at home." "Ha!" said Mr. Honest. "That is a hard one, hard to explain, and harder to practice. I will leave it to you, innkeeper, if you please, to expound it, for I would like to hear what you have to say." "No," Gaius shook his head. "The riddle was put to you, and you are expected to answer it." So the old gentleman answered thus: "He first by grace must conquered be, so that sin will mortify. So he who lives would convince me, and to himself must die. That is right, Gaia said. This answer contains good doctrine and knowledge to be taught to others, until grace, Jesus Christ, displays itself and overcomes the soul with its glory. It is altogether impossible to oppose sin. For if sin is the cord by which Satan binds the soul, how would it be possible for it to resist before it is loosed from that bondage? Secondly, whether by reason or grace, no one will believe that a man who is a slave to his own corruptions can be a living testament of that grace. And, talking about this, has brought a story worth telling to mind. There were two men who went on pilgrimage. One began when he was young, the other when he was old. The young man had strong depravities to grapple with. The old man's were weaker, due to the deterioration of nature. The young man walked each day in the same way as the older man. Their walk looked the same, but which of them had their graces shining clearest, since both looked to be alike? The young man's, without a doubt, Mr. Honest said. For the one who makes the noblest effort against the greatest opposition provides the strongest evidence, especially when it keeps up with one who is dealing with half as much opposition due to old age. I've noticed that old men often think more of themselves because they no longer struggle with things as they did when younger. But they mistakenly take the decline of nature for a gracious conquest over sinful corruptions. The result is that they have been quick to deceive themselves. Indeed, old gracious men are best able to give advice to those who are young, because they have seen most of the meaninglessness of things. Yet, for an old man and a young man to set out together, the young one has the advantage of witnessing the clearest discovery of a work of grace within himself, even though the old man's corrupt ways are naturally the lesser of the two. In this way, they sat talking until the break of day. Now, when the family had awakened and were up and about, Christiana told her son James that he should read a chapter. So he read Isaiah chapter 53. When he finished, Mr. Honest asked why it said that the Saviour was to come out of a dry ground, and also that he had no form or comeliness in him. Start here, Mr. Greatheart said. As for the dry ground, it refers to the Jews, from which Christ came. For they had almost lost all the sap and spirit of faith. They were spiritually dried up. As to the bit about no form or comeliness, the words are spoken to unbelievers who judge based on outward appearance, even though they desire to see into our Prince's heart. They judge him by his outside, just like people who don't recognize precious stones when they are covered with a homely crest. When they find one, they just throw it away like a common stone, because they don't know what they have found.